This is the Enjoyer Podcast. I'm your host, James Dixon. "4 months from now, America will elect a president. After Joe Biden's tough debate against Donald Trump, there's no longer any quiet part. Everything's being said out loud. It's conventional wisdom in America that he's stumbling, he's short-circuiting, he's failing at the worst possible times on the biggest possible stages. Biden, as the kids might say, ain't him. At least that's conventional wisdom in politics. But for those of us who cover politics closely, Joe Biden's performance on that debate stage was no shock. For all 4 years Biden's been president, we've seen him wander off stages. We've seen him unable to complete sentences. We've seen him present in front of world leaders, in front of our rivals, in front of the whole world that's watching, as dazed and confused. In 2020, it turns out we were sold a bill of goods with Joe Biden. We were sold a decent man, a 50-year public servant. We were told that Biden would bring stability to the news cycle and dignity back to the Oval Office. We were told that Biden would stop the bleeding and restore America's image in the eyes of the world. We were told that, sure, Biden's old, but he still has his help. And when he furrows his brow and he gets serious and mad and crinkles up his nose, you can almost see a shadow of his former self. But on the whole, Joe Biden is unfit for the presidency and has been from the day he was installed. As Biden failed at the debate with the eyes of America watching, Democrats' first instinct was to make excuses for him. Biden had a cold, they said. Biden was up past his bedtime, they said. Yes, they actually said that a sitting president, standing and talking for 90 minutes about the future of the country, the next 4 years of the country, starting at 9 p.m., they said that was beyond the abilities of our commander-in-chief. I used to study neuro-linguistic programming, and one of the foundational beliefs is that people work perfectly. That however illogical someone's actions may seem outside looking in, inside that person's little head, they think that's their best move at that time. So this is the best Democrats have to offer after a bad debate? This is the very best they can do? Biden had a cold? Well, him and Frank Sinatra, right? Biden was up past his bedtime, so I guess the 3 a.m. call is just far beyond the realm of what Biden can do, what we can expect from the man. With friends like these, Biden hardly needs political opponents. These people are sent to protect the president. These are the president's men, and this is the best they could come up with. Biden had a cold. Biden was up past his bedtime. The debate performance was so bad, there was actually no spin that would work. That the spin employed was so lame just shows this. After the debate, after the spin room, reality set in. Most people aren't like the people who cover politics or work in politics or even listen to podcasts about politics. Most people are blissfully unaware that this little bubble even exists. And that's why the news, and especially TV news, is designed for stupid people. The game with TV news is, how do you catch the attention of half-distracted, drugged up, busy, tired, overworked, overstimulated people in just a second or two of their time? How do you do that? How do you cut through with flashy headlines and in visual mediums with a compelling image? When I transitioned from editing to reporting at the Detroit News, my colleague at the time, Charlie Ramirez, gave me a great piece of advice. So everyone at the newspaper, on the news side, you do a lot of news stories. Those happen more or less daily, but you're also assigned enterprise stories. Those can take a week or maybe even 2 weeks to report. So in addition to your daily news duties, you had to report out, 2 to 4 enterprise stories per month. And these enterprise stories are the kind of thing that win awards. They're the kind of thing that gets you on the front page. They're what gives the news its heft. In addition to the good daily stories, you have these stories that really go into some depth and explain things that people don't know. So normally for a print reporter, your training is to think in terms of your headline. What's the headline? How can I sum this up in just a few words? Charlie gave me a different way to view it. Think of the art, Charlie said. If you have a great story and you don't have compelling art, you don't have a great story and you won't make the front page. They used to say that if you don't know how your story is going to end, you don't have a story. I'd say in this one, if you don't have a compelling image, you don't have a story. And that's how it was at a print newspaper. Now imagine how image conscious a website or a TV station has to be. Do you ever wonder why there's so many porch pirate stories on the TV news in Detroit? Now, you may not know this, you just live here. I used to work in the news here, but Detroit is actually considered a top news town in America. But between the fact that it's relatively cheap to live here and the amount of crazy events that happen here, from crime to political corruption, we have a lot of characters also. We have a lot of some of America's big businesses. There's a lot going on. Detroit is a great news town, especially for the cost relative to a Washington or a New York. We live in a top media market, and that means that porch pirate stories are never the most important or the worst crimes to happen in Metro Detroit on any given day. They're not serious stories. They don't teach us anything about ourselves or our society. There's no moral of the story. Porch pirate stories run for one reason: there's a good visual. Run a few seconds of video, a talking head saying a few words about what it all means, if anything, and 30 seconds later, you're on to the next story. So Biden's problem is that the debate he just had offered a lot of compelling visuals and bad visuals for Biden. There's almost no image of Trump that you remember, but you, in your mind's eye, when you think of it or even think of stories you've read about it, you see Biden frozen on that stage. Call it Weekend at Biden's. So print newspapers ran photos of Biden's blank facial expression, with not a thought to be seen behind his eyes. Social media and TV news ran the videos. Those videos showed Biden freezing, zoning out. They show him unable to complete thoughts and sentences. They show a man whose status is shaky for the next 6 months of the presidency, let alone another 4 years. Who are we kidding? We've talked about the late replacement theory for weeks now. Back when we first started, it was novel, almost conspiratorial. See, everybody back then was talking about the thing, but here we were on the Enjoyer podcast, only place in Michigan you could find people talking about the thing behind the thing. Well, after debate night, the late replacement theory has entered the realm of conventional wisdom. People consider it more likely to happen than not. I don't. When people spoke Gretchen Whitmer's name as a Biden replacement, they're not whispering it anymore. They're shouting it online. They're speaking it on TV. They're saying that's what they're hearing when they walk through the airport and talk about it. So I'll tell you a line that we've told you for months now. She's running. Normally, the reporters who cover a Whitmer in Lansing would be the best source of information about her. But somewhere during the pandemic, our Lansing reporters turned into repeaters. They stopped covering Whitmer and started covering for Whitmer. They run stories in her voice explaining her motives as if she's the only voice out of 10 million people that we need to hear. They don't even bother pretending to ask how those things affect 10 million people. No, how does the governor justify it? That'll be our headline. Hey, perhaps the Lansing crew hopes to follow Whitmer to Washington someday, like Ron Fournier did, following Bill Clinton from Arkansas, of all places, to Washington in 1993, when Clinton was elected president. Perhaps they actually believe Whitmer is some master politician and can do no wrong. Either way, their inability to be skeptical or critical of Whitmer disqualifies us from treating them or using them as an authority. So today, you and me will have to figure this out for ourselves. Nobody in Lansing can say this, so I will. This is the case against Gretchen Whitmer. This is why she will not be the Democratic nominee in 2024. First is the most obvious point, which is that Biden is still the best that the Democrats have. Other than Bill Clinton, other than Barack Obama, name one Democrat with better national reach than Biden has. Another thing you should factor in here is that Biden is a 5-decade, 50-year Washington politician. That's different than just being in politics generally for 50 years. He's been in Washington for 50 years. He has friends everywhere across the town. He can make deals with a lot of people, even if their constituents don't like Biden. They like that politician, and that politician likes Biden. And if that politician lends their credence to it, they'll go along with it. Mitch McConnell is probably the best example of that in Kentucky. Biden has a lot of friends, and Biden is still effective as a politician. Biden at this point might not be a great candidate, but I believe Democrats will coalesce around him just like they did in 2020 And for the same reason, there's no better person to serve as president, and there's no person who has more credibility with a wide group of Americans than Biden has. And I have to say this, Biden's compromised state, the state you just saw on that debate stage, is ideal for the people who handle him. It's ideal for the people who really run the country. A question you should have had when you were watching that debate, and it became clear that not only is Biden not running America, but that he can't run America because a lot of the job of the president happens after 9 p.m. You should have been wondering, well, if Biden's not really the president, and he obviously is not, who is? But let's leave that for another day. What we need to focus on today is that if a Whitmer or a Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, if one of those people were to replace Biden, they might actually get the idea that they were sent to Washington to run things. Think about it. You take someone in their, 50s, maybe early 60s, young compared to the two guys who are running for president right now. You have them come in at the 11th hour as a replacement for a president who can no longer defend himself. After 50 years in public office and public service, Joe Biden is no longer the man he was. He can no longer stand for his country. And so a Whitmer or a Newsom runs in on horseback to save the day. You think that person coming in to save the day, coming into Washington with many years left to serve, with their own team, with their own ideas, with their own spin on things, you think they wouldn't want to run things? See, the advantage of a Kamala Harris is that Harris knows the play. Harris knows what's up. Harris knows that she's just as installed as Biden is. She knows what hand it is that feeds her, and she's basically fine with carrying on the status quo. Were something to happen to Biden, Harris would carry on the same arrangement that Biden has. And so among those handlers, Harris is absolutely the replacement they'd want. But the best argument for the late replacement theory is actually the constant disavowance of it. Reporter Shane Goldmacher of the New York Times tweeted that Biden's campaign team recently sent out a fundraising email acknowledging the talk that Biden should be replaced. The email compared Biden's polling versus Donald Trump against how other Democrats would do against Trump. Among the Democrats mentioned were Whitmer, Newsom, Kamala Harris, and Pete Buttigieg. Buttigieg, we don't talk about much on the show, but he's U.S. Transportation Secretary, and these days he makes his home in Traverse City, Michigan. So, potential presidential replacement, potential governor, potential Senate candidate years down the road. Pete has a lot of time left in life and in politics. He'll be something else. But the polling data that Biden sent out was strange and didn't really seem to work in his favor. If the debate stage showed that Biden had lost his fastball in retail politics, this email shows that he's lost something in the back room, back door aspects of politics as well. He sent out polling data that in no way helps him. So Biden he sent out polling data that shows himself down 48 to 45 to Donald Trump, with Kamala Harris with the same margins. Then it shows that Newsom and Whitmer both only get 44%. Trump would beat both, but he doesn't actually reach 48%. He doesn't get as high as he did against Biden in either case. Just to recap, the polling data shows Trump doing his best against Biden and Harris. He gets the 48, and they can only reach 45. It shows Trump doing worse against other Democrats and even losing one of those races, as the ranks of the unknown voter would grow in those scenarios. Here's the problem, and Democrats know it. Whatever replacement they would choose would not remain unknown for long. They would soon find out that the national stage is very different than life as they've known it in Springfield or Sacramento or Lansing. Second, there's a Kamala Harris problem, and this is a big problem. After the debate, CNN had on Kamala Harris as a guest. In the aftermath of the worst presidential debate anyone can remember, people actually believed that Harris would go on to make the same mistake. I had just watched the debate myself, and normally I like to turn off CNN as early as possible whenever I've been forced to watch it. But this time I popped up some popcorn. It was like 11 o'clock at night, but when they said Kamala Harris was coming on, there was no way I was missing that. I was thinking, shoot, Biden just shot himself in the foot with that performance. Harris might take down the whole ticket if she pulls a Kamala. I was expecting her to pull a Kamala. Yes, she's a beautiful woman. Yes, she's a former prosecutor and senator, and she's done some things and she has some chops in politics. But even if you don't follow politics closely, what you've seen from Harris shows you she's not the best public speaker out there. She tends to word salad when she's flustered. She's easily offended and cops an attitude when things don't go her way. And then there's that tendency to cackle that comes out at the worst possible times. But then Anderson Cooper interviewed Harris at the worst possible times. Just minutes after the Biden debate, she represented herself well. She looked good out there. She didn't cackle. She spoke boldly in Biden's favor. She minimized the worst debate in history down to a mere slow start. If America was watching and half expecting Kamala Harris to be the second domino to fall that night, they came away disappointed. I surely did. Let's not forget, Biden is Kamala Harris's meal ticket. Vice presidents serve at the pleasure of the president. FDR had several different vice presidents, not just Truman. I mean, it used to be a thing in America that a vice president going into a second term wouldn't know that they were necessarily going to be kept on. We've had a more stable situation in more recent years. You can't think of a recent switch out, but they used to happen fairly regularly. So, on a night when the president could not defend himself and could not speak for himself, it was Kamala Harris who stepped up with the sword and with the shield. There was still that bad reality of what had happened, which couldn't be spun away in one interview. But ruin happens fast, mudslides happen fast. When Harris was presented with a great chance to fail, she didn't. Instead, she came off tough and surprisingly shrewd. She came off as a formidable opponent. This is likely the Kamala Harris who appears off camera. When things are going well, Harris is used as comic relief or to lock down the black vote. She just did a pretty bad skit at the BET Awards trying to lock down the black vote. That's where they'd like to keep Kamala. They don't want things to get so bad that she has to be the one to defend, but as we just saw, when she needs to, she can. This time, when things were going bad, it was Harris who kept the ship on course, just like Joe Biden did for Barack Obama in 2012. People forget this, but there was times in 2012 when it looked like Obama could lose the election, and that was no truer than after that first debate with Mitt Romney. Obama looked like he didn't even want to be there. I remember Bill Maher, the comedian, said at the time he'd given $1 million to the Obama campaign. And he said after that first debate, it looked like Obama spent the money on weed. It was that bad. People forget, but it was actually Joe Biden. Joe Biden had the next bite at the apple. He had the vice presidential debate against Paul Ryan. And so it turns out, Biden, old Irish politician, Paul Ryan, young politician. It didn't take long in that debate for Biden to assume kind of that fatherly, daddy muscles kind of role against Paul Ryan, and Ryan had nothing to say against him. He looked like an empty suit on stage against Joe Biden. Joe Biden looked like vice president. Paul Ryan looked like a guy running for student council. It was a joke. That debate actually reset the Obama campaign, and then Obama ended up having success in 2012. But there was a time when it looked like Romney was going to win in the polls. Then that bad first debate, had the avalanche kept going, Barack Obama maybe doesn't get that second term. So when things hit the rocks and you need someone to get back on course, your vice president needs to be able to do that. Kamala Harris just did that. Had she failed in that duty, it would have been easiest to replace her. If we can't have a Biden at the top of the ticket, we certainly can't have Kamala Harris mucking things up running second. But that's not true anymore. Harris held down her part of the deal. So let's say that somehow a coalition is built that does convince Joe Biden to withdraw from the race. Let's say that Jimmy Carter leaves hospice. He picks up Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, and they all show up at Biden's Delaware home with hats and humility and ice cream in hand. They talk to Biden, and he listens. They get past Joe Biden's objections, and she listens. They speak in warning tones about the wrong side of history, but how Biden could be remembered as a legend forever if he does the honorable thing and bows out. Let's say Biden hears them and says yes. Congrats, you've just achieved the impossible. Right after that debate, someone on CNN actually compared the conversation that needs to happen with Biden to when senators joined President Nixon at the White House in August 1974 and told him, President, you don't have the votes. If you were to come down to an impeachment, you would be removed forcibly from office. Rather than that, Richard Nixon chose to resign. So, in this scenario, you've just pulled the Watergate conversation without the plumbers, without the criminal act, without the impeachment. You've just pulled a Watergate on a sitting president who just won every single primary. Congrats, awesome. You've done the impossible. But that's just the first half of the switcheroo, is getting Biden out. The second half is choosing a replacement that America can accept. That replacement has to be Kamala Harris. Harris is a member of two of the most sainted demographics in America. She's black and she's a woman. And if you think that black woman will take a place on the back of the bus and be replaced with a Gretchen Whitmer, no, she would not. And if you think black voters would accept such an arrangement, no, they wouldn't either. Democrat math doesn't work without black voters. We've talked about this. Remember, Hillary Clinton lost in 2016. Instead of choosing a black candidate and shoring up the black vote, Hillary chose for VP a white man that she was comfortable with. Black voters did not appreciate this. The thought of going from 8 years of a black president to 2 more white faces in the White House didn't sit well. Clinton did the unthinkable that year, and she ended up losing to Donald Trump as a result. This is widely considered the reason she lost. In 2020, Biden made clear he would nominate a woman as his VP. Then, after the death of St. George Floyd on Memorial Day, Biden upped the ante, said it would be a woman of color. Look around in national politics. That's not a very deep bench. So Kamala Harris was elevated to VP. Whitmer herself agreed to this. Her team told the press at the time that Whitmer had advised Biden to pick a black woman as vice president. Whitmer was at that stage in the vetting process where we either go deeper and figure out, are you the person, or do you bow out kindly? Whitmer bowed out. If in 2020 Whitmer accepted the racial hierarchy, why would she reject it in 2024? And why would Democrat voters who live for such hierarchies, why would they be willing to ignore the Kamala Harris problem? I'm not just talking about black voters. I'm talking about white women. I'm talking about white guys who think they're woke. I'm talking about anyone who's been to college in the last 20 years and had to do little privilege hierarchies about who's in a better social position than who. If you think all those people, after all those years of brainwashing, would accept the dumping of Kamala Harris, they would not. There's talk that Kamala Harris could be offered a Supreme Court seat, but that assumes too many facts not in evidence. First, Harris would have to trust whoever is making that promise. That's a shaky proposition. There's not exactly anything she could do if they were to rescind the promise. Second, Harris would have to believe that that person is more likely to win in November than she is. Good luck convincing her of that. Third, there's no guarantee that Harris would survive the nomination process. There's no guarantee that Democrats are going to control the Senate next year. Though as a former senator, and it being senators who makes these decisions and confirms nominees, my guess is she would probably be okay. But there's a lot of uncertainty there, and you'd have to feel like the Supreme Court seat was yours with certainty to accept being kicked off the ticket. There's too much certainty for someone as smart as Kamala Harris to buy that. Besides, for someone with political ambitions, a Supreme Court seat is a trap. It's the lifelong penalty box. There's no more running for office once you get a Supreme Court seat. There's no more political opponents. You've maxed out. Harris wouldn't be above politics sitting on the Supreme Court. She'd be out of politics. It's tough to imagine that she would think that that's a good thing. And did you notice on the Biden polling from the fundraising email? It actually showed Harris and Biden posting the exact same numbers against Trump. The message there could not be clearer. If it won't be Biden against Trump, it had better be Harris. Third, if Biden is unable to serve and to go on as candidate, that means Whitmer was in on it. In Politico today, Whitmer got a taste of Washington politics. Someone described as a rival for Whitmer in 2028 told Politico columnist Jonathan Martin about a call Whitmer supposedly made to the Biden camp. In this third-hand retelling, Whitmer made 2 points on the call. First, she disavowed seeing her name mentioned as a Biden replacement and said she's still riding with Biden. And second, she allegedly told Biden that Michigan is not winnable in 2024. Nobody in Michigan who saw this report actually believes that Whitmer says this or that she believes that Michigan can't be won. Michigan's voting rolls are rather bloated. 105%. That's more than 100%. That's more than the amount of eligible voters. 105% of 18-year-olds in Michigan are registered to vote, which is incredible. Democrats have left themselves plenty of cushion to push in anyone they put on the ballot. The idea that Whitmer would see a race 4 months from now as not winnable doesn't strike me as something Whitmer would ever think or ever say. Martin, the reporter, admits that the information came from a Whitmer rival, but he still presents it as true rather than doubtful. He didn't quite heap enough salt on comments we have every reason to discount and disregard. And that's why we as readers must constantly be skeptical. Even when a reporter gives you all the information for you to judge the report for yourself, you still have to do so. So Martin, in a way, kind of had his cake and eat it too. He said, look, I heard this crazy thing from someone who's a Whitmer rival. We don't know if this was said. We don't know that it was done. All that's true is that Martin was told this third-hand information. So that's the lowest level of journalism. In many local newspapers, this story wouldn't have even run. The lowest level of journalism is it's true that someone said it. No, the standard for journalism is you're supposed to print actual true stories about things that actually happened. So saying that someone said it, you've not met your burden of proof. You've not done your duty as a reporter. Martin, to his credit, he did give us enough context to discount the words. It comes from a Whitmer rival. How would that person have a window into what Whitmer told Biden's team on a call? It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So Jonathan Martin played the telephone game and he wrote down whatever he was told, regardless of whether those things were true. This is political journalism in America, and you need to understand it. It's a mix of wish casting, guesswork, and what I'm hearing. It would be a grave mistake to think of these as true stories. Read them closely enough, and they even tell you that the stories aren't true. They ask questions in headlines where you read the actual story, and the answer is no, but it's presented with the question head to make you think the answer might be yes. This story was planted, and Politico even tells you by who. But did you catch that part? Martin refers to the planted story as blade work. He used that word, blade work, done by a rival. Why he ran the story anyway, I'll never know. Must have been a slow news day. Craig Mauger, a reporter at the Detroit News, asked Team Whitmer about the report, and they made an outright denial. If Biden withdraws from the race, it's for one reason. He's unable to fulfill his duties. But you and I know he's been unable these last 4 years, too. I'm sure after the debate, no shortage of normal people has found supercuts that are out there of Biden zoning off or wandering off. This is not a new thing. If Biden's unable to fulfill his duties, his campaign co chair would know that and should know that. And so if Biden were to withdraw, it would bring more questions to Whitmer than would supply answers. And then you're left with that classic question of a political scandal. Who knew what when? Who knew that Biden was unable to serve the people of America anymore and was far beyond his station in terms of his abilities? Did Whitmer know? Did Harris know? Joe Biden knew. Barack Obama knew. The only people who played pretend this whole time were the Washington media. They told us the emperor's robe was stunning and brave. Then he gets out on the stage and we see he's ass naked. Political reporters are supposed to bring home insights that are not available to the average person. But for political reporters in Washington, it took them watching the same TV show we were watching to see what was obvious to us this whole time. Biden can't do this. Let's say Biden's out and somehow it's not Harris. Explain how you leapfrog over Harris, you get Biden out of office, and then it's his campaign co-chair, Whitmer, who takes the job. Explain how Whitmer doesn't face that question of what did you know, when did you know it, and what did you do about it? In all these talks that a campaign has, Whitmer never noticed the guy's a little off. Whitmer never questioned if he's ready to do this. What did she do then? Did she sound the alarm? To who? That Politico story could be read as Biden's burn notice to Whitmer. And perhaps that's what Whitmer was doing when she made the call to Team Biden, was sounding an alarm. Not that Michigan can't be won per se, but perhaps that it can't be won by Biden in his current state. Team Biden would see such concern for what it is, cunning, and this would not be appreciated. Regardless of the truth or the falsehood of what was said, let's infer this. Whitmer did call Team Biden, and presenting herself as being out of the running and not wanting the big chair, and she would never betray good old Joe. She likely only cemented her ambitions to do just that. It sounds to me like Whitmer called Team Biden and gave the dreaded vote of confidence. Among sports writers, it's a common theme that when an owner gives the coach or an athletic director gives his coach a vote of confidence, that coach is on their way out. Something about saying the quiet part out loud. This would be a bad time to be seen as scheming and cunning when your mentor is down on their luck. And when that mentor is the president, he has unlimited moves to make to fortify his position. It would be a mistake to think that all is lost for Biden or that anyone else offers a salvation he cannot. In 2008, Barack Obama jumped the line ahead of Hillary Clinton. But he did one thing to endear himself to voters. He won their votes. It might have been Hillary's turn, but it was Obama's time, and not even the Democratic machine, the best machine they had, the Clinton machine, could stop him. It was destiny. A replacement for Biden wouldn't have any of that going for them. They wouldn't have won votes, they would just have a crown placed atop their head. They wouldn't be swept in without question, they would instantly become the most interesting person in America. For Gretchen Whitmer, that moment in the sun would be more like a trial by fire. That Politico story was kind of a shot across the bow, a preview of what Whitmer could expect if she stumbles onto the national stage, thinking that somehow she's going to elevate overnight from Lansing to Washington. That's doubly true if Whitmer's rise is seen as coming off of Biden's downfall. No, the American people don't read the news or read it too closely, I'm sorry to say. But I'd have to think even we would notice someone moving from campaign co-chair to candidate and would take that with more than just a little bit of suspicion. Was Whitmer actually lying and waiting for this day, waiting for it to come out in tragic fashion that our president should not be president and hoping to pounce in at that moment? I hope not. That would not speak well of her as a person, and I have to think people would not appreciate that about the politician Whitmer. It's just not behavior you like to see. I've seen nothing in Whitmer's skill set to make me think she can handle a media that's even curious about her, let alone suspicious of her. For years, Whitmer has taken softballs from the Lansing media. Even with the Politico story, the Detroit News' first instinct was not to find out what was true. It was to disprove a negative report about Whitmer. With reporters like these, who needs a press office? If Whitmer does occupy the big chair, the Washington media will then cover her the way they've covered every Democrat since FDR, with fascination and deference. The hard questions will be faced at Republicans. How dare you try to stop the Whitmer agenda? Our duly elected president and our democracy wants it. Who are you to stop it? Until such time, Whitmer has to make it through the minefield. As she's learning right now, there's other candidates who are more connected to media in states that have more media and better media than we have, who will plant stories about her. Reporters who are close to those candidates will run those stories no matter how dodgy. Even if they try to clean it up and explain that it's dodgy, they'll still run the story. And then when the hometown paper tries to clean up for Whitmer, nobody who runs in Washington circles will read it or notice or care. This is a preview into the challenges Whitmer will face stepping beyond Lansing onto the national stage. Life's different when you're not preaching to your amen corner. And politics is different when the media is not your amen corner. If Whitmer continues to dip her toes into the Washington swamp, she will get the scrutiny that comes with national politics. At that moment, she will realize that her friends in Lansing have left her unable, much like Joe Biden was on that debate stage. Whitmer's blade work in Politico may have come from a 2028 rival and the White House all at once. Don't look now, but there's that Kamala Harris problem again. The message behind all of this blade work is clear. Big Gretch, don't you dare think you'll replace Joe Biden. Not in 2024. Washington is a long way from Lansing, and buffs don't travel well.